Good afternoon, everybody, or good morning. Hope you're all having a wonderful day today. So, for today's on-demand class, I would just like to go over a few things that we didn't cover in class on last week, and a quick assignment for this week, which will review chapters 1 and 2 of our book so far, and well, not another one, but the same role play that we did previously. I'd like you to go back to that and give it a good think and write down your thoughts about it. So anyway, we'll talk about that in a second. All right, so let's get started here. All right, so we have, of course, chapter 2. We're talking about a true bilingual once again, and there's just one thing. I had a good question from last week about one of the categories that we talked about. All right, so today I had a good question from a student last class about heritage language learners, so just let me talk about this real quick. So, of course, heritage language learners, uh, I grouped them maybe unfairly with receptive bilinguals. I did this because a lot of the research focuses on heritage language learners that are receptive bilinguals as well. But of course, that's not always the case, right? But heritage language learners are within the larger scale, I suppose. Heritage language learners are defined by their language background, usually being raised in a home where their home language is usually the minority language. In the case of the United States of America, where this term originated, or at least it's widely used, where a non-English language is used, and someone who speaks or at least understands the language and some degrees bilingual, but perhaps, like we said before, is not a complete balanced bilingual, maybe anywhere between receptive and balanced, and does not distinguish between a coordinate or a compound bilingual. But just wanted to clear that up in case there were any other questions. Just because you're a heritage language learner doesn't necessarily mean that you're a receptive bilingual. So thank you for that question. All right, so before we get into the next parts, there's some questions, of course, in class. If we were doing this in class, I'd ask you to talk to one another, but please think on your own, right? So for pages 27 to 30, please discuss in your group, is being bilingual rare in your country? How about all around the world? In what cases is it challenging to maintain bilingualism or multilingualism? And what factors may make it difficult to stay bilingual, multilingual? Give it a good think before we go on to the next one. And of course, as I was thinking about this, bilingualism around the world, uh, to put it in perspective for Americans, I suppose, 20% of Americans are bilingual. This is a little bit from 5 years ago, I think, but I don't think it's improved much, right? But yes, over half of the world's population is bilingual. Bilingualism is more the rule than the exception. So places like the United States of America is definitely the exception to the rule, right? And even within that, right, 55 million Americans speak a language other than English at all. So out of the 300 million or so is much more likely, right? All right, so from the readings, we had how children become bilingual. So, of course, As I said before, as we all know, being bilingual is more the rule than the exception, right? But of course, there are many challenges to maintain your bilingualism, especially when discussing the power dynamics of the minority, the majority language, and even within countries that are bilingual, if you happen to be trying to maintain language that's not being used in that country, it might be difficult, right? Countries with a different minority language, for example, if you're trying to maintain your Spanish in a place like Japan, where maybe most people speak English and Japanese, it might be a little bit harder to do so, right? And I think I mentioned it last class, but in a adult case study, a very interesting part of the 2 out of 6 bilingual families was the German family was actually um, the non-native father. Just he really pushed for his children to remain fluent in German. So even though he wasn't a native speaker, which shows it's not really that important, he was able to help his children maintain their German and English while living in Australia. Don't give up, right? Of course, that is to say that, as we talked about previously, vocabulary development can happen more slowly compared to monolingual students. In the studies that we saw, the comprehension abilities were equivalent, right? Of course, not exactly the same, but more or less comparable, right? And production abilities were the same if adding L1 and L2 together. So this is a big if, and uh, obviously for teachers, educators in uh, elementary school, middle school, high school, that's hard to perceive, right? Uh, and you obviously can only see one side of a bilingual student's production most of the time. So, although that is true, thinking as a cognitive linguist, that's a good thing. But for if you're trying to assess the learner, then it can be challenging to give them the benefit of the doubt, right? Uh, However, as I talked about last time, you can kind of think of it as a you know status bar, I suppose. I see some of these in like resumes. Uh, I don't recommend it necessarily, but it's a good visual, I suppose. Maybe okay, your German is 5 stars, and your English is 4 stars, and Latin is 3 stars, for example, right? So obviously, if you're going for, 2 or 3 languages, maybe one's going to be stronger than the other, and it's going to take you a lot longer to fill up 2 of these bars as opposed to just one. Okay, so here we have the figure 4 from page 30 that talks about the number of words that monolingual and bilingual children are producing at various ages. So, of course, monolingual is the 2 dots, and bilingual is the dashes here. So we have a number of participants, right? 9, 8, 10, 12. We have a lot more monolinguals here. Of course, this is all ages and months. But we can see that for the most part, the number of words, right, that are being known, that are able to be understood, right, within this range for the monolinguals. So doing better at first, and then there's a little bit of a slump there, but then monolinguals come on back, and around 26, 27 months, they kind of meet in the middle here. And the bilinguals, of course, maybe a little bit slower on the uptake, and then, okay, they start to understand quite a bit, and then, well, all right, and they meet around there, right? Sorry about that. So the interesting part here is the bilingual total conceptual one. It's a little bit too dark. Anyway, so that is, of course, that the measure of the unique words. So, for example, apple and Ringo would count as not two words, just the one word, right? So this is where it's kind of it's much lower than the other two because it's kind of doing double duty here, right? But if you keep that in mind, then actually it's probably more than that, right? That means they have double. They have both words in their brains at the same time. So I don't know. Could you make that argument that it's more like 600? But anyway, this is an interesting study of the productive vocabulary. So this is what actually the children can say. So very interesting study here. Thank you. It's a bit hard to see. All right. So yes, it shows that it's not any slower than that of monolinguals. It's just a bit different, right? They're all proceeding at different rates, but and of course there's different numbers of children here, so it's a little bit still a good comparison, I think, right? We obviously have more data for the monolinguals than we do for the bilinguals for most of them here, as opposed to that, but almost the same. Anyway, very interesting stuff. Right, for the last section here, what can children tell us about bilingual? So, of course, take a few minutes to think on your own before moving on to the next part here. So, what are some challenges in raising children bilingually? What must parents be cautious of? If you are planning on raising your children bilingually, what sorts of things are you going to have to do? How is your parenting going to be different? And between you and your spouse, obviously you guys are very young still, but maybe imagine, right? What sorts of rules would you have to put in place in your house to encourage multilingualism in your house? What are some fears around being bilingual? Do people believe this in your country? I think for the most part, well, anyway, think about it yourself. What does the research show us? And in the case of learning two languages, do parents prioritize one over the other? Probably. Anyway, what cognitive benefits are there to being bilingual? So take a quick minute to think about it and then go on to the next slide, please. So for challenges for bilingualism, there are quite a few, of course. If the input of the minority language is lacking, bilingualism is hard to maintain. Of course, input at the starting point, of course, we're talking about spoken language. So, spoken language being heard by the children is very important, right? Reading, of course, comes later on, and reading input is important as well, but spoken input is the most valuable at this point. So the more time the language is spoken, the more vocabulary they will learn, right? So if one parent who is in if you have two parents, one is in charge of using the L1, right? And then another parent is in charge of using the L2, right? But perhaps it's lopsided, right? Maybe if the L2 is used, right, 80% of the time, it's hard to draw with a mouse, sorry. And the L1 is only used 20 of the time, right, 20% of the time, then most likely the L2 will be used, right? So if I were to drastically reduce the amount of English I spoke at home with my children and only speak it 20% of the time, the children would probably stop using the language, right? Or I suppose if that was the case at the beginning, right? But yes, if it's used less than 20%, children will not speak. So maybe some of you are saying, all right, well, why don't I just put on the YouTube, right? Put on YouTube or have Disney playing in the background. Um, that's might be somewhat effective, but studies have shown that it needs to be spoken, authentic language, giving children, it has to be reactive. So it can't just be passive. We think input as just being passive, but actually a lot of it is, case by case. A TV is going to have its own story, but if I'm talking to my children, I'm directly reacting to what they're doing, usually in the form of stop doing that and, clean that up and put the toilet seat down, for example, right? Anyway, so just playing TV would not be enough to get you over that 20%, although it may be effective in some way. But, spoken language is what we're talking about in this case. Of course, there's lots of challenges for bilingualism, including minority language grammar development may lag. So the minority language, whichever one is stronger versus the weaker one, the grammar may suffer. That may result in shorter, less complex utterances, right? So in your minority language, your L2, if you want to use that, in your minority language, your sentences will be less complex, shorter, and may have some grammar errors in there as well for a while, right? So development may lag, but that doesn't mean that it won't eventually catch up with others. But for a time, there will be some. You'll be a bit slower, I suppose, in your other language, which might have led to um, the idea that second language learners were a bit more slower or a bit not as intelligent as monolinguals, right? Because their grammar, they may have some smaller mistakes for a while, longer than other monolinguals. So again, comparing the high hurdler to the sprinter or to the high jumper is unfair. So in the same way, we should keep that in mind that second bilinguals may have some different development. And language mixing is also cited as a big fear for parents, especially monolingual parents who are talking about, teaching their children a different language from an early age, right? That children may mix their languages, although it doesn't happen. It doesn't not happen. Sometimes it does, but usually children will be able to differentiate, especially once they get older, which language to use. So especially this is fascinating with parents. If one parent speaks Spanish, the other one speaks English, then the children will respond in Spanish to the Spanish speaker and English to the English speaker, for example, right? However, yes, if they're missing some vocabulary words, then they may, uh, you know, insert that language, that different vocabulary word in the language that they know it in, right? So that's the problem with the with the coordinate bilinguals, right? They may know one thing in one language and they may not know the same concept in the other language. So in that case, they might その代わりに他の言語から取り入れますですね. They might take that language from the other language and stick it in where it doesn't belong. But that's about it. Not much else for language confusion. More substitution, right? Language substitution. one of the big myths around bilingualism that it was shown to slow development in uh, IQ, for example, might have come from this Sayer study from 1923, which was a bit unfair. Those people who are researchers out there know how important it is to find like populations that are not so different, right? It's a comparable, a control group, for example. So this one was not very controlled, right? Prepared monolingual and Welsh English bilingual children coming from rural or urban backgrounds, and reported that bilingual children from rural areas obtained significantly lower scores than monolinguals, right? So they kind of highlighted one group of the four of the rural and urban groups. And of course, yes, later criticism pointed out the groups were not matched for age, the big one. So if you're comparing 6-year-olds to 12-year-olds, yeah, obviously, the socioeconomic status and degree of bilingualism, if they're receptive, if they're balanced, if they're ideal bilinguals, right? It was not a very good study, but it still was very popular and well cited up until the 50s, I think. Anyway, so be careful out there when you're looking at those research studies. Take a second look. So in this chapter, we also looked at the cognitive benefits to being bilingual. Bialystok found that children were able to understand from an earlier age that the words that we use, the labels for words are arbitrary. There's no real um, innate quality, right? So apple is apple in English, and apple is ringo in Japanese, and ringo is sagwa in Korean. So, the idea that there's the building their abstract reasoning skills a little bit earlier than perhaps monolingual children. They also found, Majumdar joined up and found that they found greater control and focus on certain tasks than monolingual students. So that's good. I hope that's seems to be just a single study, but we see similar kinds of more focus uh, from bilingual students, for example, right? And Adoscope finds lots of different results, stronger symbolic representation, stronger control of attention, right, in both linguistic and nonverbal tasks, better learning strategies, problem-solving skills, and enhanced creativity and divergent thinking skills. And there's a wonderful cognitive flexibility as well. Yes, and one more type of bilingual, just to really confuse everybody, but I think this probably is one of the easier ones to understand, simultaneous and sequential bilingualism. So I think most of us are probably sequential bilinguals to some point. Of course, learning more quickly, right? An earlier age is always better, so they say, right? But of course, simultaneous bilinguals might be the strongest. I'm not sure, but which one is more common in your country, especially in your schooling system? And why? Why not? Is that a good thing? I'm not sure. There's also a video from Cognitive Advantages of Bilingualism, which talks a lot about what we were talking about. So if you want some additional follow-up information, Dr. Maria Plinsky is a great resource here. So she'll talk about a lot of the uh, bilingual advantages and differences between sequential or simultaneous bilingualism, and talks about the factors of literacy. Uh, do you need to, if you're not literate in that language, your second language, does it really matter? Not so much. Even if you're not literate, as long as you're fluent, bilingual, then you still have lots of cognitive advantages about that. So anyway, if you have a moment, please check it out. It's long, but it's a good video. Good review. So let's get to the final section of the reading. What can we do? So bilinguals may have trouble competing with monolingual speakers in school. As we saw before, they may have gaps in vocabulary, perhaps. They may have gaps in their grammatical development. They may be a little bit shorter utterances. They may have less complex language. They may make mistakes. Right? So, how can teachers help these students? How can they support them? Right? Is there any extra resources that could be used to help bridge these gaps? Or is it just raising awareness to if teachers knew about these phenomena that happen with non-native speakers, with multilingual speakers, with bilingual speakers, would that be enough to assuage their worries? Would that be enough to make them not worried about them as much, right? And how can teachers who don't speak other languages support their bilingual and multilingual students? So oftentimes in education, we kind of get caught up. In the United States of America, we get caught up in the idea that, okay, there's only two major languages, English and Spanish, for example. So as long as you have a Spanish speaker in the school, you'll be safe, right? But what happens when you get students from other parts of the world? We had a big a refugee population that spoke Karen languages, so students from Burma, I believe, and there was a big need for speakers of Karen that we didn't have. So we had to have a lot of support for those students. So finding volunteers or finding people that can speak English, bridge the gap, and of course, second language speaker uh, specialists were always in the room as well to help out. So, but it was a big surprise, I suppose. So, in the same way, Japan kind of has the same sort of problem. Maybe they might think that because English is spoken all around the world, English is probably the strongest, one of the stronger languages to rely on. But there may be times for other languages are needed. So what can we do? How can we support them? If perhaps we don't share the same language. So one of the things that I believe teachers can do to help is, of course, using technology in a way to bridge the gap, linguistically, of course. And I'm sure many of you have seen these neat pen tools. I forget exactly what they're called, but even we have one at home somewhere. The kids lost it again, but it was helpful for a while, right? It's a bilingual pen that actually speaks Japanese and English or whatever language you need it to do. So I'll share a quick video about the Niwatori Shiki Kanji Kado technology that's been used to help bridge the gap in some educational scenarios. So please check that out. It's pretty neat. All right, so for homework tonight, I would like you to look back at chapters 1 and 2 and answer one of the three case studies uh, that I will give to you on the Moodle for this week. So from last week, we did a quick discussion of case study number 1. If you were to be a teacher of Japanese, would you choose small children, adolescents, or adults? And please give a reason, give a rationale for why you would choose that group. So for on the forums tonight, I would like you to write out an answer of 150 words or so, and please reference the readings while you are giving your answer, right? Which group would you choose to teach, and why. At the end of the 3 months period, they should be able to give a perfect or near perfect self-introduction in Japanese. So which group would you choose? For the second case study, something that happens quite a bit. So one of your friends, who's a teacher, has many students who can speak. I chose Brazilian because quite a few uh, there's quite a few people from Brazil that come to study in Japan, and this happened quite a bit in one of the school districts that I was teaching at. Uh, so many of the children can speak Japanese, right? They can speak Japanese very well to the classmates in Japanese, but in the classroom, they are quiet when they have to answer questions related to the lesson. So why does the student suddenly become quiet in the classroom? What concept is this highlighting? And what can teachers do to help these students? What do you think? And the third case study here, so kind of a quiz. I want you to think about if you were a student, which one of these would give you the most trouble, right? Can you translate these into Japanese or your home language? My name is, I'm thirsty. Can I have a drink of water? After we finished school in June, my family spent our summer vacation visiting relatives in Italy. Right? Or worms are called decomposers. They have a special job, which is to eat leaves, grass, and other things in nature. Your math homework sheet is a review of everything learned in class so far. Working long division problems with double-digit divisors. Ooh, I already have a headache. So, which ones would be difficult for you to translate if you were a student? Which ones of these would be difficult to figure out and why? All right, so for next week, there's a few things that I need you to do. So for next week, we have a chapter 1 and 2 quiz. So please review chapters 1 and 2. Review the Quizlets. It is a open book quiz, so you can refer to the book. You can refer to your notes. You can even look it up on the internet, I guess, if you want. I don't think ChatGPT will help you too much, but you could try it, I guess. But I would recommend it. But anyway, open book quiz. I would recommend just reading through the book to get the answers. But anyway, in addition to that, choose one case study to answer as well. One of the three I just highlighted. And please write about 150 words in the forum post, and then I'll ask you to respond to a classmate. Please check the Moodle for more information. All right, and chapter 3 is talking about one of the myths that all you need to do is read and listen to the language in order to learn it. So input is all you need, right? Just like the song. Anyway, I don't think we'll get through all of it, but please read pages in the real world and the first part of what the research says, the lion's share of it, up until page 44. So I'll ask everyone to do that while you're relaxing on the beach, having fun somewhere. Anyway. And we'll probably break it up into 2 classes, I believe, for next week. So we can take it a little bit slowly. All right. So please enjoy your golden week, and I'll see you next time. Please check the Moodle for the assignments. Thank you.